All right, hello and welcome. It is Tuesday, August 7th, and we've made it into week two. You've done and completed your first round of assignments, which includes your 2D platformer game composition along with the 2D platformer sound design. So, this Tuesday session is going to be set up very much like the rest of them going forward, where we will start out by taking a listen to the submissions that we have each week. On FSO, there is an assignment called the Optional Feedback and Peer Review, which is a discussion post where you can post up a version of your game composition for that week's project. And so I go in and I actually take the final versions of them and I load them up into the same logic session and we'll go through them one at a time. So I will discuss overall the what we're looking for from the composition, how it might be structured, what we should be paying attention to, and then we will go through one by one or one at a time to listen to each one of them. And I feel that it certainly is beneficial for the individual who has submitted, and I highly encourage that everybody submits each week. And even better, if you are here in the live session and want to have us take a listen to it, and we can open up the microphone and discuss, or we can just you can ask questions through the chat box, and we can discuss different aspects of it. That's also great. But I also think it's extraordinarily beneficial for everyone to see everybody else's version of the project, because you will get back individual feedback videos along with your submission. And that's, like I said, that's all well and good for your one submission, but you get to see everybody else's variation, or at least in this case, 3 different variations of how people might have approached this composition. And it'll give us an opportunity to discuss the good stuff and the bad stuff and things to work towards and things to avoid. But it is all positive overall and definitely beneficial for everybody involved. So hopefully this first round will encourage more folks, because the more people that submit, the more things we have to talk about and the more variations that everybody gets to check out. So definitely take that opportunity each week. And then in the second half, after this, we'll switch over to the archive, which will discuss the new assignments for week 2. So we have a new game composition. A new game requires a new style of music, which requires a new approach to the music and new instrumentation and new production and all sorts of fun new stuff. So hopefully you've taken the opportunity to download this week's game and project and check out it. Week 2 is set up very similar to week 1 in the structure of the class and the assignments and all that stuff. But new game, new project, new music soundtrack, and that will create all of the content. So week 1 you have the music and sound effects for 2D platformer. Week 2 you have the music and sound effects for Angry Bots. Next week 3, we will get into how your WAV files, your music and sound effects, actually make their way into the game. We'll kind of switch over to the technical side. Towards the second half, we'll get all your music working in the game. We'll test it out and kind of mix and finalize the project towards the end of the month. So, having done the first round here, gets you kind of gets you a view of how things are going to be set up. You probably have a much better idea. Either a whole lot more clarity or maybe a whole lot more confusion. And after you took a pass at doing the project, hopefully it's not confusion by any means. I didn't have anybody reaching out to me with their DAW on fire saying, "Oh my goodness, it's all crashing and burning and nothing's happening, or nothing's working." So everything seems to be heading in the right direction, and we'll check out these three compositions and give us a lot of different things to talk about. So let's see. Is there anything else moving forward through this week? If you have any questions about the assignments or anything on week 1 or as you're moving forward in week 2, again on Thursday, each week we have an open session to discuss different aspects of your composition. If you want to demonstrate anything or get a bit of early feedback before you submit, you can bring something to listen to, or bring questions, or we can just go over different aspects of games or the industry or whatever it is. So that's what we have in store for this week. So let's go ahead and take a listen to our 3 submissions here. So what we have, you might, if this is your composition, you might notice that each person has their own track. Each student has their own, all of the 9 of the files of their submission on an individual track. So over here, in this column over on the right side is all of the main loops. These are 3 8-bar main loops that make up the majority of the composition. Most of the time while you are playing the game, you will be hearing these 3 main loops kind of looping and randomizing and switching around during gameplay. And so you should hopefully take the opportunity to, after kind of seeing what we're going to do here, taking the opportunity to load up your WAV files back into the DAW session and take a listen to them just in the same way that we're doing, meaning just take the bounce files, put them on a track, listen to them back to back, kind of shuffle them around and listen to the different combinations. Hopefully you have realized and tested out that intro 1 doesn't necessarily go to main loop 1, so you have to make sure that intro 1 intro 1, 2, and 3 work with main loop 1, 2, and 3 and all of the different combinations, which also works with the 3 ending cues in all of the different combinations. So with the main loops, first and foremost, they need to loop. Odris, as you mentioned in the chat here, you forgot to chop off the endings of these files. I am going to guess that whenever that happens, and it looks like it's pretty much the same amount each time, that when it was bounced, include audio tail was checked, which you do not want to do, at least in this case, because it will add in a little bit of silence or a little bit of that audio tail in case of like reverb or decay or anything, which is fine if you're doing a stereo bounce or something, but it's not going to work on a loop, and it puts this kind of even silence at the end. So I'm going to guess that the music itself loops just fine, and so you'll just have to edit that down. That's a real easy fix overall. But that's something to be aware of, is making sure that there's no pops or clips or gaps or fades or anything that is silence or makes the player realize that they're caught in a loop, because sometimes we'll hear the music like hiccup or kind of jump a little bit as it loops around. So you want to watch out for any of those little stutters as it transitions from one to the next. So the format-wise, these all look pretty good. They look like they're the same level, like the same volume or the same mix across all 3 of the files. This one in the middle looks a little bit concerning compared to especially the first one here. Sometimes it's just a change of instrumentation or velocity or something like that, but you don't want it to be a wildly different mix jumping around from one cue to the next. Then from the composition, these are 3 8-bar loops that need to contain the same instrumentation which makes it feel like the same band is playing through the same song, and not in the same song, but all three of them make up one song, or three parts of one song that feel consistent. So everything needs to be in the same key. Everything needs to be in the same tempo, same time signature, and similar instrumentation. I mean, you can change the focus or the mix. Like certain instruments kind of become the solo or kind of step forward in the mix. But generally, it needs to feel consistent across all three of the main loops. Oh, actually, all 9 of the files, with the intros and endings included. Compositionally, make sure it is typically like upbeat, nothing too slow, nothing too laid back, and it will have, which probably means a strong rhythm or strong drum pattern, and then you're also going to need a strong melody, which will create most of the change and development. You want to watch out for repetition in any one of these cues, where you only have 3 8-bar loops to make your musical statement. So you want to make sure that it is going to constantly develop and change over top. All right, so that's the main loops. The intros are meant to build up excitement or build up energy heading into the main loops. Wherever you start with the main loops is what you need the target you need to aim for by the end of the intros. So the intros should rise. Especially in the kind of second bar, drums will build up. There might be a fill or a snare roll. There is all of the instrumentation typically kind of rises up. Maybe hangs on a 4 or 5 chord or the dominant chord until it drops down, probably to the tonic, where it is going to can start out in each one of the main loops. You are better served or well served by starting out on the tonic of each one of the main loops, so you have this kind of center point or anchor point for your composition. You always know that you're going to start there. So you can aim your intros at it, and you can aim your loops at it, and you always start at that kind of home base. You don't have to, but it's a pretty good place to start. What else? Intros, build, rise, use all of the instrumentation. Whatever instruments you have in the main loops, make sure you're also using them in the intros and endings, and then use drums, bass, harmony, and melody, everything to kind of build that rise or that energy, anticipation up into the main loops. The endings are generally the opposite of that. They need to end, they need to resolve, they need to reach silence. So this is actually a good place where having a little bit of extra, well, this is a whole bunch of extra, silence at the end of the file is good. You do not want them to be cut off, like these files down here. The ending of each one of these gets cut off by the end of the file. You want to be in control of that. You do not want just the fact that the file is over to determine that the file gets cut off. Like, you want to end the music and then the audio file is over. So these kind of things will be really kind of obvious when it gets chopped off. So we'll listen up for that. All right. Let's see if I can. Will this work if I can quickly doctor these? Oops. Are they all the same length? Oh, yes, they are. Pretty much. Cool. Let me just close these down a little bit. All right. Let's take a listen. Let's not listen to all of them, though. That would probably be a very bad idea. All right, here we go again. I want to go, hey, somewhere in there. Cool. So we checked this out on Thursday, and there wasn't an accordion in there. I thought there might have been, but you've since added one. Isn't that correct? Here in the chat, for this assignment, we did 2 measures on the intros and outros. This will change depending on the game specifications, right? Absolutely. By no means is this the like absolute way it's done, and no, because every game is going to be different, and every like the needs of it is different. It's like, sorry, excuse me. It's like every guitar you pick up is slightly different. Every piano you play is slightly different. Every studio you walk into is different. Everybody plays it differently, so it is by the needs of the game overall. Now, there are the idea of intros, main loops, and endings is very, very common. But the fact that it's 2 bars and 8 bars and 2 bars is by no means standard. And it is just something you would determine with the game company. Either they would know exactly what they want and they might be able to tell you, or they would look at you with a dumb look on their face and go, I don't know, what do we need? And that kind of stuff you would come up with. The fact, like, I don't want them to be 2 bars, I want them to be 8 bars, and I want my main loops to be like full on 2 or 3 minute long loops. So I remembered your mention of the accordion and went with it. Excellent. Yes, I definitely like it. I remember we discussed the focus on the lead, and I think you have it. Right? In the syncopated kind of going back and forth between the bass and the drums, and then the lead works very well. And then everything's kind of strong here. That almost feels too loud compared to the previous one, and it might just be because of the blast of the accordion kind of sustained chords there. Yeah, but it's a whole bunch of fun. Makes me think though that it needs to be in like France or Greece, not necessarily London. So maybe it's like the world tour or something. Like he's got to go around the world defeating all the different enemies, and he's got to stop off in different places. But then that might be something to be considered. All right. Let's do 3 intros. Let's try this. Yep. All of that works very well. I like the little ding. Watch out, I heard the little ride bell in there, and the... What was that? A little bit of hi-hat? Or just crash. Watch out for those. Make sure that when you do actually chop them down and they transition, it'll work. I think it's going to, because it's just kind of so fast. But you got to make sure for any of those little like cymbals that will take a while to decay, that it doesn't just get cut off and sound weird as it transitions. And 3 endings. Da-da-da-da-dum. Hey. Yep. Everything sounds good. Excellent. So, everything, well, short of the silence at the end, but everything's going to be formatted correctly, everything's going to loop properly, everything's going to transition properly. You're going to have to watch out for those little tiny cymbal things, but they might be so kind of quick. I mean, it's not like a cymbal crash on the 1 or something like that. So you have to maybe watch out for those. I think the endings are, I mean, everything compositionally is great. You have great kind of rhythmic and harmonic movement, and with that, the addition of the accordion, it creates a great lead melodic idea. And then maybe with the endings, the only other thing would be, since you have such great instrumentation, is to do fun things where, like these 3 sound like everything is very well resolved. So you could do things where you have more deceptive endings and resolve on everything's in a minor key. And you wouldn't want to resolve to major, but maybe just dissonance or diminished, or just going to some odd last chord that makes it feel unsettling or unresolved, so that you would kind of feel like you want to go back into it, or the whole band kind of just falls apart. So other fun things to consider, but by no means everything's set up and functioning well, and compositionally is going to play back well. So nice work there. Let's try the next one. I think we're good to go. All right, here we go. Rhythmically, I think they work very well. I like the energy in each one of them. Everything's formatted to work properly. 8-bar loops that are transitioning from one to the next. I would say that one of the biggest things that stands out is the difference in instrumentation, or maybe how the instrumentation is used from one cue to the next, especially the change here with this kind of new synth overall, which again, it might be in some of the other ones, but it's either really low or used a lot differently in the string lines. So, and then with all of this, switching back over here to the first one, which is very kind of subtle, everything is just long sustained notes. So those kind of changes make it feel more like 3 separate ideas versus 3 variations on the same idea. So I would think, like, I really like the groove and kind of the harmonic progression. Well, it doesn't progress all that far, but just kind of the kind of the groove and the riff that you have here. which is very different than the first one. The first one's really kind of slow feeling, almost feels like the build up to the other ones. And every single time it would switch back to this one, it'll feel like the energy comes back down. So you're going to want to create more movement, a stronger melody that doesn't repeat kind of the same phrasing over and over again. This one works very well, though it does feel like it's missing a melody. Each one of them, although the third one has the string line in it, but each one of them feels like they need to have a real strong melody that doesn't kind of repeat the same idea and uses the full 8 bars to develop its idea. And then the third one, like I like the grooves that the second one and the third one create. I just think they sound too different from each other and from the first one. So it's going to be like figuring out the element, like maybe you use kind of the groove idea of this electric piano in the second one, but use this synth as the lead line that seems to be really missing through these. And it doesn't have to be just like runs and up and down the scale, and it could be a lot more groovy, just not as repetitious and sustained and kind of half notes and whole notes. Yeah, so I think more consistency. I think you have all the elements, they just need to be spread across the different cues a little bit differently. 3 intros. Yeah. So this these 3 intros kind of present more, or puts more of a spotlight on the fact that the 3 sound different. Because intro 1 sounds like it's supposed to go to main loop 1, and intro 2 and intro 3 sound like they're supposed to connect to main loop 2 and 3. So again, you're going to spread out the instrumentation to create more consistency. So the instrumentation's the same across all of them, but the composition changes. They also sound a bit like 2-bar loops as opposed to builds, like kind of something that just goes in one direction as opposed to looping around, like this. Like I could sit on this 2-bar loop and it makes sense. I mean, there's a little bit of snare fill, bop, bop, but it's generally a solid 2-bar groove, as opposed to an intro which would rise over time. This is like the same pattern going around. So this one actually builds up. Like this one doesn't make sense as a loop because it's like a one-way direction. Everything is kind of headed or getting more energetic in the second half. So yeah, watch out for the consistency in the instrumentation, making sure that 1, 2, and 3 all can work against each other and create more build. And 3 endings. Yeah, this first one might end. The second 2 get cut off, and we'll just put a little bit of silence in between each one of them, or separate them out if they allow me. All right, here we go. Whoa, cool. All right, so these endings seem to use more of a lead line and lead idea than I really got out of the main loops. Like this Like if your lead synth was doing that all the way through the main loops, that would be great. Like and not just following the chord shapes, not just like arpeggiating through the chords, but like developing a line and then ending with this. Let it decay. Let it go to silence. Like it does get cut off very quickly. It needs to go da 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 bum and kind of hold it there for a minute. Not a minute, but a moment. Ending 2. Like this little lick at the end tells me that you should be doing more on the electric piano, on that kind of road sound. Have more movement than just the chords, or have the chords and include a lead line on top of that. Yeah. So, same sort of idea. Develop whatever as much movement as you have and as strong of a resolution that you have in each one of these. Bring those ideas over to the main loops. But again, this sounds like main loop intro 1 goes to main loop 1 goes to ending 1, so you got to do something where they kind of cross over a whole lot more. Yeah. Excellent. So, as mentioned before, everything's formatted correctly. Everything's going to loop and transition. You have all the ideas. You have all the parts. You just got to rearrange them and repurpose them to make it similar instrumentation across all 3, so that 1, 2, and 3 work against each other. And then do more of whatever the lead ideas that you have in the endings. Do more of that through the intros and main loops. Yes. Excellent. Good job. Let's move to our third one here. All right, again, visually, this first main loop looks quite a bit louder or more intense than these two. Certainly the second one and even the third one a bit also. But let's go ahead and take a listen. Cool. So there's some good ideas in here. There's some things to take a listen to also. Again, everything's formatted properly. Everything's 8 bars. It transitions well from one to the next. Rhythmically and kind of compositionally, it transitions. The main thing, would be the mix. It sounds like just the balance of certain instruments is too loud. Like here, turn it back up a little bit. So like the piano's quite loud, the banjo's quite loud, the drums are really kind of low and kind of distant, and then they are definitely loud compared to what's going on in 2 and 3. So the first one here, the main thing that throws me off is the repetition. You basically state your phrase in, kind of in a 2-bar phrase, state your idea in a 2-bar phrase, and then it repeats over and over again, which may be a combination of either using loops or using like repeating arpeggiated phrases or something like that. So like it's a cool groove overall, but that take the banjo and take the piano and move them around a little bit, and just move back and forth between the general rhythm and phrasing that you have, and then add little tweaks each time there would be a repetition. So you're keeping in the same ballpark, but creating some of those variations. This one. So the banjo goes away, piano goes away. It's more like the strings, which are the more sustained lines. There's more drums overall, or we can actually hear them a bit more. Actually, the banjo's there, right? Yeah, the banjo's there. So just watch out for the variation in the levels of the instruments. I think this one works pretty well. It is kind of similar in the first half and the second half. Kind of sustains there. So you got that first 4-bar phrase, and then it's similar. The marimba seems to be doing a different bit of movement through there. And then this third one. So the thing that throws me off here is the banjo. It sounds too robotic or mechanical, and that is because of like using an arpeggiator and having similar repetitive velocities on each one of the hits. It's not going to be that mechanical and not that precise. And then turn down the velocity, because that's where you get all those slides and bends in the banjo sample in Logic. So there's also some dissonance in between, like the strings and the banjo. Also, where's the drums? They're there, but they're very, very low. So, yeah, watch out the balance of the mix between the different instruments, and watch the repetition, kind of taking a phrase and repeating it a couple times through the 8-bar cue. All right, so these intros seem quite a bit lower, especially this first main loop. So it'll seem like a pretty big jump going into the main loops. Let's separate these a bit. So that one sounds like an ending, because it feels like it goes back to the tonic. Kind of hangs right here and then resolves down to the tonic. So watch out for things that typically are often heading in a downward direction and then resolve back to the kind of the root of wherever you started. So let's do this. So you could use the banjo and the claps there, as long as it got more excited through the cue. So subdivide the beat, which can also create a little bit more anticipation through the intro. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So that you kind of subdivide and speed everything up, or it feels like the pacing speeds up. Then 3 intros. Yeah, kind of resolving and hitting that 1 chord in the second half of a particular intro is going to make it feel more like a resolution than a build-up, which is what these ending cues should be doing. All right, 3 endings. I think I should have mentioned this with the intros. Also, is drums. You need to have a strong, or you have a strong drum pattern in the main loops. So it seems when you get to the endings, all of that would shut off very quickly. So you want to maintain the drums at least through the first half of the endings. Each one of these endings gets cut off, and you also, like, you kind of do this in the intros, but you should end on you should end on beat 1 of bar 2, which you do here. I think it does it very well here. It's right here. Right? So you go 1, 2, 3, 4, 2. And if you just sustained and held that 2 there, let's see this. Right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 2. And you kind of hang right there. Would work very well on these endings. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 2. And just sustained, hit that first beat of bar 2 and hold there. 3, 4, 2. You don't need that little bit extra embellishment at the end. So basically, that means hit the brakes at some point, put the period on the end of the sentence, and just hit that final note, chord, or beat, and let it fade out to silence after that. All right. So 3 good examples, 3 good things, or 3 good submissions. Gives us lots of different things to discuss. And by no means were any of them like, oh no, everything is wrong, let's start all over again. You have the basic components there, or the building blocks, and there's always room for tweaks and improvements. By no means are we expecting that you're going to knock it out of the park the first time every single time. I know that for most folks going through the class, this is the first time that they've worked on this type of composition. And so really there aren't real issues with the composition itself, like the notes. And I mean, every once in a while there might be some dissonance or some rhythmic issues. But typically the challenge of this project is the fact that you have 3 variations. People might be able to come up with variation like main loop 1, main loop 2, but the third one gets a little bit frustrating or more difficult to figure out. You'll get 3 intros and 3 main loops, but only 2 out of the 3 endings, and for the life of you can't figure out a third variation or approach to one of the endings. It's the fact that you have to make intros 1, 2, and 3 work against main loops 1, 2, and 3, work against endings 1, 2, and 3, and all of the different variations that happen with that. So it's more like the fact that it's a game project, and it's interactive, and it's not just if I had you just write a 2-minute long linear piece of music, then it might be a whole lot more straightforward and more just towards traditional composition. But here it's a mixture of certainly the more straightforward part of this, which is the composition, the theory, the production. I mean, you know how to make music, you know how to bounce out WAV files, you know how to create audio, but it's taking all of that and putting it in the format appropriate for a game, and something that can be interactive and switch and react according to what's happening on screen. So this is overall a good approach and good things to discuss. If you have any questions on your submission or the project itself, if you have any other things to discuss or any ideas you want to run by me, certainly reach out through either an FSO message, an email, or like I said, we'll be here on Thursday to discuss the like haven't discussed anything aspect of the class that you want, projects, take a listen to anything that you need. So I'm going to turn it over to the archive, which will discuss the new week 2 assignments involving the Angry Bots composition and the sound design. So if you have any questions, I'll stick around for a bit and answer those. But other than that, we'll see you again on Thursday. Thanks a lot. Let's go ahead and discuss the new assignments for week 2. So we have a new project. We have a new game. We have a new soundtrack. A new style of game requires a new approach to the music. And so our game this week is called Angry Bots, and it is a demo that is provided by Unity Games. Again, this game is built in the Unity game engine. Next week, in week 3, we'll start talking more about the technology, and we'll discuss game engines and audio middleware and some of the software and tools that are kind of running all of this stuff in the background. And like I've said before, saying like game engine is like saying DAW, kind of, sort of, not really, but sort of. Basically, in the same way that a DAW is the tool that you use to make music, a game engine is the tool that a game developer uses to make a game. And just in the same way that there's Logic and Pro Tools and they give away free projects and like, here's some recorded music for you to check out and test out how our software works. They do the same thing with games. They can provide versions of the games that people can tear apart, and we can get in there with our music and sound effects. So our new game for this week is a different style of game, different approach to gameplay overall. In Angry Bots here, you are this mercenary infiltrating a robot factory. The robots are none too happy that you're there, and they are bent on your destruction, so they will come after you. And your job is to kind of go further and further into the game world. This is a much more complete game. There is more stuff going on. Let's see here. Where am I? More stuff going on than 2D platformer, or more like there's like a beginning, a middle, and an end. Where 2D platformer, the score would just go up and up and up. This one, there is like an ending to it. You can actually beat the level. It's not a full game. It's just like one level of what would be a much larger game. But it takes about 5 or 10 minutes to complete the first time. And this one is kind of a much more futuristic, techie designed world. Lots of kind of sci-fi influences, robots and explosions and lasers and rocket launchers and sliding doors and technology and all sorts of interesting things for music and sound design. It's not probably an all ages, family friendly kind of game. Much more kind of dark and intense. And our main focus with the music is the idea of ambient and action, switching back and forth between lower intensity ambient music and higher intensity action music. And when I talk about ambient music, I don't really mean the style or genre of ambient music. Not like Brian Eno, Music for Airports, kind of just a slow drone that never changes, never does anything. Ambient just means less than action. Sometimes it's known as battle and exploration. But this is the idea of there's a period of time in the game where you're just kind of wandering around the level trying to figure out what's going on. And lots of games do this, where there's a period of time where you're exploring, and then all of a sudden an enemy jumps out, and there's battle music. And the battle ensues for a particular period of time, and then you either win or lose the battle, and you move forward from that. So same sort of thing here. We have to, if you did nothing else in the game, if you just sat there in a corner and hid forever, you would hear this ambient piece of music. Ambient doesn't mean just a drone, just kind of slow and boring. It can have energy to it. It can have good instrument layers to it. It can have drums and bass and harmony, maybe even melody, but probably we'll leave that up for other pieces of music. But it can have structure to it. It can have development, and it really shouldn't just be one slow drone that doesn't do anything and just sits there. So there would be an ambient piece of music until a battle happens. And when one of the battle happens, one of these robots comes out to attack. And you'll notice that the battles are pretty short, right? So this guy wakes up, he comes to attack, you only hit him a couple of times, and he explodes. This guy comes to attack, and I kind of toy around with him a little bit, run away, let him chase you. And eventually, you'll either destroy the bad guy or the robot, or they will destroy you. And whenever these battles happen, the action music comes in. And then when the battle is over, the action music will leave and return back to just the ambient music. The ambient layer or the ambient cue will always be there, will always be playing. And when you fight one of these robots, then the corresponding piece of action music will come in. There are 3 different types of robots, and each one of them has a different action cue or action theme that's attached to it. And whenever you battle that particular robot, you will hear its action theme. And then when you defeat that robot, that theme will eventually go away. It'll fade out. So you have an ambient cue, and then you have 3 action cues that represent each of the different robots. They can play at the same time and will play at the same time. So you will, no matter wherever you are in the game, you will always be hearing the ambient cue. Then one of these battles starts and the corresponding action cue comes in. So we have to understand, how do we add or subtract this action music whenever we want. That's one of the main challenges here. We have to be able to get into a higher intensity action piece of music and then return back to the ambient piece of music as seamlessly and invisibly as possible. So, how does the game know when a battle is happening? And the answer to that is it uses health points. It uses, you have health points, and the characters have health points. You might not notice, but this yellow bar on his back is actually a game meter or a health meter. And it tells you how long it takes a lot to destroy you in the game, because it's mostly just to test out and have fun with it. And defeating one of these robots doesn't really take all that much time. So we'll have to discuss how we get back and forth between this lower intensity ambient music and higher intensity action music. Let me explain each one of the robots. The first one here is called the buzzer bot. This is the kind of flies around, is sort of annoying. It zaps you with these little lightning bolts. These guys are called the spider bots. They're basically bombs on legs. They come after you, and if they get close enough, you'll either destroy them, or if they get close enough, they'll self-destruct. They really don't do much except for chase you around and become annoying. These are the most frequent kind of robots on the map. There's another one over here. And let's go inside here. So, and then here is the third robot. This guy is called the mech bot. It's this big RoboCop looking robot coming down the way here. These I would kind of consider like a mini boss. They're kind of harder to destroy. You have to unload into them to eventually defeat them. And then there's just the same robots across the rest of the map. The good thing with the music and sound is we really only have to focus. I mean, you really are you see everything in the beginning of the level, and all of your music and sound effects will be populated through the rest of the game. So let's go ahead and bring up some of the other material. Let's see. Here's the PDF that you get. Hello? Is that not working? Shrink down. There you go. Okay. So here's the PDF you get. It discusses all sorts of different aspects of the composition of the project. You have action and ambient cues. Why do I keep turning away? There we go. You have action and ambient cues and a discussion of each one of those. How to play Angry Bots, hopefully, should be relatively straightforward, not too difficult to control. You can use the arrow keys to go up, down, left, and right. You can use the mouse to look around and then left click or just click on your trackpad to fire. There's a couple of listening tracks as reference. Different classic games in the style of this kind of sci-fi action game. Musical style. Here we're really looking and focusing on intensity. We want to make sure that whenever those robots come after you, that it's really powerful and strong and intense. You need to feel like the danger of these robots coming to attack. Nothing too chill, nothing too laid back. Sometimes I hear some music and it's like, hey, robots aren't so bad. Let's go ahead and have a cup of coffee or something like that. And they're like, yeah, sure, that's no problem. Which is not what you want. You want intense and strong and loud, and robots are chasing you around with lasers and missile launchers and all sorts of crazy sci-fi sort of stuff. So you want to match that aesthetic. On the other side of that is another thing that I get that is better, but it doesn't work too well, is like Robot Dance Party, where everything is like super hypey dance and not that dark or intense. It's like party time, and that doesn't necessarily work either. So intense and strong instrumentation. I have suggested instrumentation, synths and pads and driving bass lines, gated effects, sweeping filters, bouncing delays, fast percussion, heavy distorted guitars, big fast drums, large brass and strings, cymbal swells and impacts, anything that portrays strength and intensity. Then there's descriptions of each one of the cues, which is basically what I'm discussing now and how they'll play back. What I really want to get to is the asset list down here. There's screenshots and descriptions of each one of the robots and how they should sound, and just a general overview. Then the asset list. There's a total of 7 files that you will create for this. I mentioned 4 of them so far: the ambient cue, buzzer action, spider action, and mech action. They're each going to be 1 to 2 minutes long, and they will loop 16-bit 44:1 stereo. So don't think about this as 4 individual 2-minute long compositions. Think about it as one composition that can be broken down into 4 parts or 4 stems. So each one of these layers is going to contain unique instrumentation. You shouldn't repeat any instruments between the different cues, so that when you hear those particular groupings of instruments or that thematic line or melody or instrument, whatever it is, you can recognize whatever robot's coming after you. You almost train the player with the music so that they can hear what's coming up next. So let me explain how these 4 files work, and then I'll get into these short stingers here. So when the game starts, If nothing else is going on, you are always hearing the ambient cue. Through the entire game, that 2-minute long ambient cue will be looping around and around. The ambient cue should be subtle. It shouldn't be too much in your face. It can still have a bit of rhythm to it. It doesn't need to have strong percussion, but it can maybe have some hi-hats or a arpeggiated bass line or some sort of gated effect that will foreshadow the rhythm that's coming. And you should you want to lay down the foundation of the progression. This is going to map out how things are going to play back in the how all the layers are going to play back together. All right, so we hear the ambient from the beginning of the game. As soon as you've been attacked, you either shoot the robot or the robot shoots you, then the action music will come in. The action music will come in immediately. It will start playing from wherever it is in the loop, and you will hear action music. This point, you need the strong percussion. You probably need a couple of layers of percussion, bass line, harmony, and probably a thematic. I don't necessarily want to say instrument like a melody, but thematic. Thematic line or thematic instruments or something that tells you what robot is coming after you so that you can give that sort of information and help the player. All right, so first guy, the battle starts, and as soon as he's destroyed, the battle ends. The music's going to start fading out at that point. Then these guys jump awake, the spider music will start, and as soon as they're destroyed, it'll stop playing and it'll fade out over time. So let's go ahead and load up some examples here. Talk my way through a couple of examples of what this might sound like. There we go. All right, so as stated before, you are going to have 4 2-minute, somewhere between 1 to 2 minute long cues or layers, or even maybe think of them as stems that can play back together and play at the same time. The biggest challenge here is going to be dissonance and clashing notes. You want to make sure that there's a lot of similarities between these cues. They need to all start at the same time. They need to end at the same time. They need to be in the same key, in the same tempo and same time signature, and they need to all loop together. They need to follow a common chord progression. Because even if they're in the same key, if they're all headed to different chords at the same time, it's going to probably not work so well. So you need to, with all of the things that are the same, key, tempo, time signature, looping, starting, stopping, the things that are going to be unique are your choice of instrumentation. Each cue should have unique instrumentation that's only found in that cue. You really shouldn't repeat any instrument lines. You shouldn't copy anything because when the game puts it all back together, it's going to double things up. Like if you have the same drum pattern in multiple cues, when you play them all together, then that drum pattern is 4 times as loud as everything else. So make sure that you have unique instrumentation and then a unique composition. Each cue should have certainly a strong rhythm. That's going to be most of the action part. And then a thematic melodic line or thematic instrument or thematic phrase or something like that that helps identify whatever robot it is. Probably a bass line to help, although you don't need necessarily a bass in all 4 of them. A chord progression, but you don't also need to put all of the voicing of every single chord in each one of the cues. right? So you write your chord progression, you're going to have 3 or 4 voices per chord. Well, all 4 of these don't need to have all 4 voices every single time. Maybe one of them is just the root, follows the foundation. Another one, you've got the 3rd and the 5th. Maybe another one, you get the 1st and the 5th, if you've got 7ths in there. And you can start, if you write out the chord progression first, you have a basic common structure or skeleton to work from. So let's go ahead and check this out. Just get started here. Let's play. Start with the ambient cue. All right, I am going to I'm going to play the part of the game, just mixing these up and down. And the whole reason this thing is going to work in the game is because when the game starts, all 4 of these pieces of music are going to start, and they're going to play together. They're going to reach the end and all loop together, so they're going to constantly be in sync. The only thing is, the player's only going to hear this first one at the beginning. The 3 others are going to be silent. Then the buzzer comes in. So let's do this. Game starts. Game starts, and you hear just the ambient cue. And then once you get attacked here, that's the buzzer bot, and so the buzzer music will immediately come in. And you're going to hear that buzzer music as long as the battle's going on. And then once you defeat that robot, it's going to start fading out. And the game is going to do this a whole lot better than I can and control it in the DAW. But it's going to fade that out. And whenever that robot attacks, that music comes in. So this is the buzzer by itself. So we've added the low strong strings. You got some big timpani hits in there, big low bass drums, and there's these little white noise sweeps somewhere, I think, in here. There you go. So it adds a little bit of layers. So this ambient cue is mainly made up of, has a hi-hat pattern in it, but mostly is a chord progression. This is outlining the chord progression. No, it's a couple of notes that are just kind of presenting the foundation of that chord progression. Here in the chat, it says, so that means we're making tracks separate, so that means the music can't clash. Yeah, you are probably best to think about it as one whole composition. So what I end up doing in my composition session is I'll set up a region just like this, like a particular length that depends on your tempo of your music, and you'll count out how many bars will fit, how many bars you want to use that will fit with between 1 to 2 minutes, and then just start adding instruments. I would often start out with a basic just piano. Just start writing your chord progression, even though it's going to end up probably a very synthetic and very electronic and all that sort of stuff. Start out with a piano or a basic keyboard patch. Write out your chord progression, maybe write a few melodies that could work with it, figure out what instruments you're going to use, and then just keep stacking them on top of each other so that it becomes one cohesive composition. But eventually they're going to be bounced out separate from each other so that the game can use them individually as it needs to. All right, so that is the buzzer. And once that buzzer is defeated, it eventually fades away, back to the ambient. And then you go after the next one. So this spider pops up. When that spider pops up, the music is going to immediately add in the spider cue. It sounds like this. Hi-hat, bass line, a little melodic line that we'll hear is actually a double of the mech cue. Here it is with the ambient. And then this guy's destroyed. This guy chases around a little bit. When that guy's gone, the music will fade out. Until you get after this guy. And this guy is the mech bot. And he comes and he attacks. And it sounds like this. So with that one, you've got strong brass and strings. You basically have the high strings to match the low strings from the buzzer cue. You've got a strong lead melody. This one, where's it coming? Right about here. And you also have the ability to have 2 or even all 3 robots on the screen at the same time. So we could bring in the buzzer cue. Bring in the spider cue. And all 4 of these cues should be able to play together. No clashing notes, no clashing rhythms. Again, think about it as one cohesive composition that with multiple layers that can play at the same time. There are 3 other files that are listed in the asset list. The music buzzer stinger, the spider stinger, and the mech stinger. And those are there to help the transitions from the ambient into the action. The action cues are going to hit quickly, and you do not know where they're going to be in the music. So to help this transition, we add in stingers. And stingers are going to play when the action cue is introduced. So let me give you an example here. I'm going to divide this up like how it will sound in the game. Just kind of set this up so everything is set up correctly. Something like that, something like this. And then we'll put fades. So we got a fade out there, and a fade out there, and a fade out there. All right, so when the buzzer action comes in, when it comes in here, you'll notice that the buzzer, it'll come in probably in the middle of some phrase somewhere, doesn't have a strong impact, just kind of jumps up. So, oh, I was actually at the end of a sweep there. That's actually kind of luckier than it typically is. Turn off my fade there. Thank you. Let's play that again. So it just comes in there. And so to hide that sudden transition, we can throw stingers in here. And the game, again, the game's going to do this all for you. A stinger should hit have a strong impact at the front and fade out to silence very quickly. It's meant to distract and create a little bit of interest at that whatever the random point that's going to transition. Provides a little bit of consistency, even though it is kind of just going to be a random point. If you're familiar with electronic music and like drops and impacts and things like that, that is commonly what a stinger could be. Stingers are typically have a strong impact, maybe some low end, maybe it could be a drop. And then there's another layer or two on top of what I call like some modulation or some filtering or a pitch drop or a filter sweep or a synth arpeggiator or something like that. These are all kind of strong impacts. They should not be tonal. They should not be rhythmic, because since you don't know where they're going to be played, it might clash. So a strong hit, lots of reverb, tails out to silence. There's another one. And like I said, they are there to cause a bit of distraction as you're going from one piece of music to the next. So here's what it might sound like when played against the action cues. And again, the game does all of this for you. You just have to create the material. So it should provide a hit, and then the one should fade out, and the other piece of music will already be there. Here's another one. And here's a third one. So hopefully that gives you a good idea of where to start with the composition. I'm going to play one more here. Let's get rid of that and this and this. All right, here's another ambient cue. So this would be a good example. This would be a good example to say that the ambient cue doesn't need to be boring. It doesn't need to not move or do any or have any changes to it. Here you can hear the outline of the chord progression. You hear a arpeggiated phrase. You hear some percussion, but it's not like a kick, snare, hi-hat pattern. It is sporadic and meant to provide emphasis. Here is the buzzer cue. Here it is by itself. So it follows along, it's got a little melodic line to it. It's got drums, that's probably the most important thing to add for the action cue. Here's a spider. This one's mostly drum kit. Mostly drum kit, got a lot of crash cymbal in there. And here's the mech. Mech sounds cool. It almost sounds like an alarm going off. You definitely have to watch out when all 4 of these are playing to make sure it doesn't completely overload the master. But a common progression, a common pace, a common rhythm to it that allows each one of these layers to be added and subtracted at any point. Then the game, whenever a new idea comes into play, it can just fade in the corresponding piece of music as necessary. So hopefully that helps in describing how the composition is going to be set up. I do want to show off a couple of things with the sound effects for the sound design this week. Please let me know if you have any questions as we go along, or if you're just watching the archive, then you can send me a message if you need any sort of clarification. So that's the compositional side of things. You also have the sound design, creating sound effects for Angry Bots, 22 sound effects. Again, this is, like I said before, because it's a little futuristic and robots and weapons and things like that, explosions. There's a lot of fun opportunity for sound design. So let me just load up the sound effects. And I would suggest that you do something similar to last time, where you would load the original sound effects into Logic and use them as reference. So let's see, I'll close down this session. Don't save. Get a brand new session here. Now, when you go download this assignment, you are going to get a folder that looks like this. It's called Angry Bots Original Sound Effects. And it's going to, you unzip it, and it's going to have 2 folders. One is called To Replace, and the other one is called To Use. There's a total of 60 some odd sound effects in the game, and I don't require you to do all of them. You can use some of the original ones to supplement them. So the one that's called To Replace, these contain the 22 sound effects from the original, these do contain the original sound effects, but these are the ones that you will have to do for the assignment. And the reason is these are the more interesting sound designy kind of sounds, if that really makes any sense. They are the more obvious weapons and robot kind of sound effects. The ones to use, these are some ambiances and interior shots. Then there's like bullet impacts and ricochets, and then there's also footsteps. So you're probably not going to win any awards off of your footstep design. You're not going to get hired off of your ricochet. Well, who knows? Maybe you would. But more likely, this is a focus on the music and the and more important sound effects. So something to consider, but we definitely are going to do and replace the to replace. I include the other ones there because you can and are encouraged to do all of it, so that whenever you show this off, you can say, I did everything in this game. Otherwise, some of the original sound effects will be there still. But let's just use the To Replace folder. I'm going to take all of these sound effects and I'm going to drag them onto a track here in Logic. Open, place all the files on one track, yes. It always comes up with, actually this one doesn't. If it comes up and asks you if you need to change your sample rate, just change the sample rates of the files. That's fine. You're going to bounce them out anyway. All right, then once you have the original sound effects on here, you would probably spend some time. You'd probably clean this up a little bit. They don't need to be right on top of each other. So take these and separate them out a bit. Oh, that didn't work. Well, Logic, come on. You can cooperate with me. There we go. Do that. Do that. And you don't need to watch me do all of these. But just trust me, separate them out a little bit so that there's a little gap in there. So when you bounce everything, you have a little room. Then you would create a couple of blank tracks down below. And build all of your sound design directly below the original sounds. But listen to the sounds as reference for what they should sound like, how loud they should be, what's the shape or like the waveform look like, how loud is it, how long is it, yeah, just the basic properties of that file. And then you would build your own sound effects down below. I'm going to cheat here and just drag these down. You would not do this. Don't do this. This is a bad idea. But basically, if I were to fake it, these would be all of my effects. And you definitely mute out the originals when you bounce. You don't want the original files in there. They're really obvious to hear. And you have, then you'd bounce these out and you'd have your sound effect. And you'd go through and design all of these. Let me actually play these. I think this is going to work. Let's see if these broadcast. Airlock door close. That did not work. Hold on. How about this? Let's try that again. There it goes. Okay, this is airlock door close. There are a lot of doors in the game, and there are all the Star Trek kind of doors that open and slide open and close and do all that stuff. So there's a door open. There's a door close, and the assignment has pictures of everything, so you can play through the game. You can see what's what. A lot of times you can get away with the close just being the reverse of the open. Maybe there's a little like chunk, like ka-chunk at the end as it locks closed. But with these, you can use with hydraulics, pneumatics, servos, motors, those kind of things give you those kind of great mechanical sounds. Ambience, exterior rain. It's a rain loop. 30 seconds. Yours doesn't have to be that long, but just a consistent rain clip that you'll hear when you're outside of the robot factory. Interior hum. This is when you go in. This is like room tone. I always think that sounds like the inside of a spaceship or something. Like, as if I knew what the inside of a spaceship sounded like, but I'm sure. Something like that. Flying buzzer destroyed. There's a lot of sound effect. There's a lot of explosions. So the two main things in the game are, not main things, but things that have a lot of sounds are doors, opening and closing, and explosions. So what I would suggest that you do when you go do the sound design is you should be familiar with like the Westar Music Library to get access to sound effects there. There's another resource called freesound.org, which is a website. It's kind of a community-driven website. Westar is great because it has a whole bunch. It has the Sound Ideas Library, which is a great, like, very high quality sound effects library. Freesound.org is community driven. There are lots and lots of sound effects on there. There's also lots and lots of very bad sound effects that are not worth anything. But there's also some very good stuff in there. And for the types of things you're trying to do, a lot of that stuff can be covered there also. So what I would do is say, okay, I need explosions. So go off and search for a whole bunch of explosions, bring them back in, and then combine them all together to make the sounds that you need. Don't work on one sound at a time. Don't say, I need a flying buzzer explosion. Go find an explosion, bring it back, edit it, name it, bounce it. Then go, oh, I need a mech explosion. Then go back out, get another file, bring it back in, edit, name it, format. Like, that takes too long to go back around and around and around like that. Do it in chunks. A lot of times when I do sound design, I'll spend one day just looking through sounds. Like, just go find my library of whatever it is. And I'll just go, here's 25 sounds that I'll eventually put all together. Then maybe the same day or maybe the next day, I'll go back and I'll just edit everything. Put them all together, layer them up, see what works. Then often, if there's time, I might have another day that's just like mixing and bouncing and formatting and delivery, like finalizing everything. So, so if you work in big chunks like that, it often makes the process a bit easier. This is zap electric. This is when the lightning bolt kind of shoots out and zaps you. Mech alert. All of the robots have an alert sound when they recognize that you're there. They kind of wake up and attack. So there's kind of an alarm sound there. Mech destroyed explosion. It's an absolutely huge sounding explosion, which is good for that very large mech robot. These are patrol mech footsteps. As that thing is walking down the hallway, you will hear these footsteps for footstep 1, footstep 2. I think they completely cheated and used the same sounds. You could probably make it a little bit more interesting than that. Missile explosion. So this is when it fires at you. So it shoots its missiles at you, which is this shoot missile sound. So it fires them, and then it either hits you or hits a wall or something like that and explodes. The spider alert. Right? So a little couple of beeps as it wakes up. You don't have to do exactly the same thing. Just kind of do some other stuff. I've heard very cool things where people have done like vocoded robot voices when these things like wake up and it goes attack or something like that. Spider destroyed explosion. These are the bombs on. That's when you destroy it. This is when it self-destructs. I think that is a horrible explosion sound. It's a real big letdown compared to the other explosions. Proximity. This is when the spider bots are coming after you. They beep. And it's very important. Just make that one little beep. And you don't want it to be very long, because what happens is as it gets closer to you, the beep gets faster and faster. It goes beep, 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 beep. And so if you have like a long sound, that's just going to stack up and sound all sorts of crazy. So all you really need is one really short sample. Spider self-destruct, that's the bad explosion. Interior doors open and close. These are the Star Trek doors that slide open and closed. I just think that sounds like somebody's window being rolled up or down. Locked door opening. Once you get, you stand next to these computer terminals and you hack the computers, and it allows these locked doors to open. Player death. This is when you die. That's not true. That's a gunshot. That is the incorrect sound. Let me get that out of there. Player hit. This is when you take damage. Player shooting. This is the gunshot sound. It's pretty important with that sound. That is going to be a looping sound. And it is important that you match the timing of those shots, because I think it matches the animation or the muzzle flash in the game, which is this. So this is player shooting. Oh, muted. Right, so that's just a loop going around and around. You would probably be best served 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. There's 12 in here. Just build your shots right below that and just use the same timing so that it creates this kind of smooth loop overall. And the last one is, I think it's the last one. Yeah, terminal hacked. Right, just some sort of electronic sound as the terminal is being hacked. I've heard people like type it on their computers, or it sounds like a keyboard, or there's a voice in there that says terminal hacked. I don't know why a computer would tell you it's been hacked, but whatever. So that hopefully, again, will give you a good direction for your sound design. Always make sure that you mute out the original track. Don't include the original sound effects in there. Create the 22 sound effects for Angry Bots. And I think that should be it. That's certainly quite enough for me for this afternoon. We did the peer review of the submissions, which was always great. Again, it hopefully encourages everybody to submit also for next round. And then we talked about your Angry Bots and your Angry Bots music and sound design. So if you have any questions, go ahead and post them up in the chat or send me a message. But other than that, let's go ahead and wrap it up there. And I'll see you again on Thursday. All right. Thank you very much.